I never thought one weekend on the farm would change everything. My husband had always loved the countryside. He grew up there, working the fields, feeding the animals, learning the value of hard work. For him, the farm wasn't just a place. It was a way of life, one he thought would be good for me to experience. When he suggested we spend a few days at his old friend's farm, I agreed without hesitation. It sounded peaceful, a much-needed escape from the chaos of our everyday lives. What I didn't know was that peace was the last thing I'd find there. From the moment we arrived, I felt something was off. The air was thick with tension, though I couldn't quite place its source. My husband's friend Carter greeted us warmly enough. His rugged charm and easy smile made him instantly likable. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of something unspoken, every time he looked at me. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but as the hours passed, I couldn't ignore the way his gaze lingered a little too long, the way his words seemed to hold a double meaning I couldn't quite decipher. That first evening after dinner, my husband and Carter stayed up late talking. I excused myself and went to bed, tired from the day's travel. But as I lay there, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I turned over and saw nothing but shadows, the faint glow of moonlight spilling through the curtains. Still, the sensation was so strong, so unnerving, that I got up and locked the door. I didn't sleep well that night. The next morning, Carter offered to show me around the farm while my husband worked on fixing an old tractor. I hesitated, but my husband encouraged me to go. "Carter knows this place like the back of his hand," he said. "You'll love it." So I went, telling myself I was overreacting. After all, Carter was my husband's oldest friend. He wouldn't do anything inappropriate. Would he? As we walked through the fields, Carter was charming and talkative, pointing out landmarks, sharing stories from his childhood. For a moment, I started to relax, enjoying the fresh air and the beauty of the countryside. But then his tone shifted. "You're different," he said, his voice lower, more serious. "Not like the other women he's brought here." I frowned, unsure of what he meant. "What are you talking about?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I just mean you're special. You've got a spark. I can see why he married you." The words hung in the air, heavy and loaded with meaning. I didn't know how to respond, so I didn't. As we continued walking, Carter's demeanor became even more unsettling. He stood a little too close, his hand brushing against mine, accidentally more than once. I tried to laugh it off, to ignore the growing knot in my stomach, but it was getting harder to dismiss. When we reached the barn, I made an excuse to head back to the house. But Carter blocked my path, his smile gone now, replaced by an intensity that made my heart race. "You don't have to be afraid of me," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I'm not," I said quickly, though it was a lie. He took a step closer, his eyes locked onto mine. "Good, because I'd never do anything to hurt you." The way he said it sent a chill down my spine. I nodded, murmured something about needing to check on my husband, and walked away as fast as I could without running. By the time I got back to the house, my hands were trembling. I didn't tell my husband what had happened. I wasn't even sure how to explain it. Carter hadn't done anything outright wrong, but his behavior was unsettling. I spent the rest of the day avoiding him, sticking close to my husband whenever possible. But Carter's presence was impossible to escape. He always seemed to be nearby, watching me with that same intense gaze. That evening, after dinner, my husband suggested we all sit outside and enjoy the cool night air. I wanted to say no, to come up with an excuse to stay inside, but I didn't want to raise any suspicion. As we sat around the fire, Carter's eyes never left me. He asked me questions, subtle but probing. His words always tinged with a meaning I couldn't quite grasp. My husband didn't seem to notice, laughing and joking as if everything was perfectly normal. But nothing about this felt normal. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I heard a knock at the door. My heart leapt into my throat as I froze, listening. "Who is it?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's me," Carter said, his voice low. I didn't respond, hoping he'd take the hint and leave, but he didn't. "I just wanted to talk," he said, his tone almost pleading. "Please." I sat there, torn between fear and confusion. Part of me wanted to open the door, to confront him and put an end to this once and for all. But another part of me, the part that knew better, stayed silent. Eventually, I heard his footsteps retreating down the hall, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The next morning, I told my husband I wasn't feeling well and wanted to leave early. He seemed surprised but didn't argue, packing up our things while I stayed in the bedroom, avoiding Carter at all costs. As we drove away from the farm, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. But that relief was short-lived. A few days later, I received a text from an unknown number. "I'm sorry if I scared you," it read. I just couldn't help myself. I deleted the message without responding, but the memory of that weekend stayed with me, a constant reminder of how quickly things can spiral out of control.